party people. It's Kofi, Laura, and Sylvia. Welcome to Bookish, a casual book club. Today we will be talking about one of the great crime fiction writers, James Crumley. And I will share a bit about how I came into reading his work. But first, Sylvia, I would like to, you've done some background reading on him. If you can share with our lovely audience what you've learned about Mr. Crumley.
Yeah, well, the first thing about James Crumley, if our listeners slash readers aren't already familiar with him, is that he comes from this sort of writing lineage that is the same sort of genre as Raymond Chandler. So apparently, Crumley would introduce his work every time by calling himself the bastard child of Raymond Chandler, which is very, very true if you read his writing style and if you've ever read Raymond Chandler. But Crumley was born in 1939 in Texas and served in the military in the 50s in the Philippines. And then he came back to stateside and attended the Iowa Writers Workshop in the 60s. So it's a pretty prestigious. It's like the top of the writing workshops, and it's a very literary group, right? And he actually started writing what is called like hard-boiled crime fiction. His work is described frequently as violent. And he's also described as sort of like the literary child of Raymond Chandler and Hunter Thompson, right? So if that gives our readers and listeners an idea of his style and his subject matter. So he has sort of like the gumshoe detective, and he's got a common one, just like Chandler did. For Chandler, it was Marlowe. For Crumley, it's two. One is this guy named Milo, who is a violent drug and alcohol addicted womanizer. And the second one is Shagru, who is the detective in the novel that we are looking at, the private detective, who is a violent drug and alcohol addicted womanizer. So very, very little difference between the two in that sense. Crumley himself said, though, the difference between the two is that Milo's first instinct would be to help you out, whereas Shagru's first instinct would be to shoot you in the foot, which was very, very, yeah. I was giving a nod, like, yes, because we saw that happen in this novel. After his MFA, he taught at the University of Montana, where he lived until he died. So Montana features prominently in a lot of his work for that reason. And I thought was really interesting in the beginning of The Last Good Kiss, which is widely considered to be his best work in this genre, he has a little epigraph from the poet Richard Hugo, from which The Last Good Kiss gets its title. And he was good friends with Richard Hugo, who's a poet who lived in Montana as well. And Richard Hugo, as a poet, used to say that that language, one of my favorite things from him is that language, if it just becomes a matter of communicating information, then it's dead. Language is dying if that happens. And I definitely got a sense of that from Crumley's work, because Crumley said one time in an interview that if the language isn't fun, there's no sense in writing. And more than the story itself is the kind of things that you can do with the language that was more appealing to him. And so you kind of get a sense of that in his writing as well. But yeah, he died in 2008, and he left behind this sort of writing legacy that puts him squarely in that, like I said, that lineage with Raymond Chandler, Dashiell Hammett, the writers of these sort of detective crime novels. So Kofi, how did you get into reading Crumley?
It was kind of weird. I wanted to do something creative for my dissertation, and I thought I was going to be a crime writer, and having never read any crime novels, I other than The Postman Rings Twice, I think I read that one, and Thin Man. That's and then I read Chester Himes' A Rage in Harlem. That was about it. And I did a draft or so, and I shared it with a committee member named Penelope Pelazon. And she basically was like, "You need to read a little bit more. It's not." She didn't say it was horrible, but her comments were like, "You shouldn't be writing this. You haven't read enough." And she didn't say it in those ways, but basically that's what she got to. So I started reading more. I started reading crime fiction based in DC, and that's how I kind of stumbled upon George Pelecanos. And George Pelecanos sets a lot of his stuff in DC. It just so happens that he knew a teacher of mine named Fraser O'Leary, who was one of my teachers at UDC. And it was kind of weird because it kind of came in like a full circle. Like I discovered Pelecanos's work, and one of the things he mentioned was how he was a fan of James Crumley, and I had never heard of James Crumley. And so I just started, picking a book from his. And so the first book I picked was The Last Good Kiss, and it was the first page, but a lot of people quote the first sentence. It wasn't the first sentence for me. It was sort of the middle of that third paragraph, where he's finally found the subject, because this guy Shiguru. I think it's Shakraw, because I'm supposed to be gay. I think it's a Gaelic name, but I could be wrong.
It's Shiguru. It's
Shiguru. All right, so Shiguru.
He says it himself in another book. He says "shug" as in sugar and "rue" as in rue the goddamn day. That's how he sells it.
There you go. All right. And so he's wandered into this bar, and he sees these people. Their naughty faces and nasal accents belong to another time, another place. The Dust Bowl 30s and the Rattle Trap homemade Model T truck heading into the setting sun. As I sat down, they glanced at me with the narrow eyes of country people, looking me over carefully as if I were an abandoned wreck they planned to cannibalize for spare parts. I nodded blithely to let them know that I might be a wreck, but I hadn't been totaled yet. They returned my silent greeting with blank eyes and thoughtful nods that seemed to suggest that accidents could be arranged. And a lot of his sentences were just so loaded with this. So it's kind of poetic, but it's also very direct. And you get a sense and a clear understanding of where he is. He doesn't belong. But yet he sort of fits in to the fine aspects of that community. And as he's going about searching, he finds Traherne, but then he goes looking for Rosie's daughter, which is in itself a different kind of story, in a way that it's almost like a lost love. He's looking for a missing person, but yet there's some loss there. There's some longing there. And that becomes, I think, part of the reason why it's The Last Good Kiss. Even though this isn't the last novel, it's actually his first novel about C.W. Shiguru. But it's this sort of, it's kind of like a coming of age, but yet he's middle-aged and he's kind of broken, but still somewhat noble as a character. And I think the character development is interesting. It is interesting if you think about the time period when it was written. It was definitely in the late 70s. The hippie movement was sort of in the wane. And so he sort of speaks to a lot of that. And I found just the book just an impressive thing. And so I started reading The Wrong Case, The Dancing Bear, and The Right Madness. I think that was the other book. So yeah, I just started becoming a fan, but I never wrote a mystery novel. So I just started reading them, and that became my thing for me. So yeah, that's how I got into it. It's not something I would have character, most of the crime fiction is written in like big major cities like LA, New York. Maybe you could find some in Chicago, DC, Baltimore, especially if you think about David Simon. But those are more like true life crimes, not really crime fiction. But Missoula, Montana, uh, that's not where I would think a hotbed of private eyes are coming from.
Yeah, like he's going fly fishing. Right. For our listeners, this guy's going like fly fishing, and he's also like solving a missing persons case, and it's just very funny and like yeah, it's interesting to see
there's a lot of driving.
Right. Yes, there's a lot of driving. It's very scenic.
Yeah.
I remember I read Raymond Chandler in grad school. I think kind of similar recommendation from someone that I knew, but I know that I read like an excerpt of his writing, and I thought it was just so good, like the way that he was handling the sentence, the line. It was so tight and so punchy, but yet funny and irreverent, and also really poignant and poetic. And I was surprised that it came from like a mystery crime fiction, because I had like these ideas of what that genre was like, mostly caricature ideas, but once I read that, and it really kind of opened my mind to like what is possible in different genres, that really set me on a kind of like a journey, I guess, for this kind of writing. And one thing though, the writing is good when you realize how problematic these writers are in their novels. Like, I mean, for listeners out there who want to pick this up, it's a fast read. It's an engaging read, but it's also extremely offensive. Basically, any people group you're part of, he will offend you, like as a writer. Because Shigru, these PIs are rough around the edges. That's the way they are, But I realized, like, I was trying to describe it to my husband. I was like, look, if this guy were alive today and active on Twitter, he would be 100% canceled already. But his writing is so good that even reading it now, even though I'm like, I was rolling my eyes, I bookmarked some of the parts where I wrote ill, problematic male writer, toxic masculinity. But the writing is so good. Yeah, the writing is so good. I was just like, well, in some parts, the writing was so good. I was just sort of like, okay, able to tolerate it better, I guess, than I would have were it just sort of,
this is I guess this kind of genre, even of crime or mystery or detective stories, is not my usual cup of tea, right? But I was really interested to read it at your high recommendations, guys. So and I did enjoy it, but like Sylvia was saying, there was a lot of eye rolling. Like, sure, every woman who is near you wants to have sex with you, of course. But I found that one thing that I did find interesting was the way, and Kofi, you were referring to this, the character building of this detective. And what I find interesting about this genre is that usually these writers like develop a character, and then there are several novels, a whole series of novels with this character, so that it becomes, kind of a interest in the character as much as the mystery that you're trying to solve in each book, right? So what you're following is that particular character. And I think that's why, in this sense, the development of the main character is so critical for a series like this to be successful. So I could imagine myself reading another book involving this character, because in a really weird way, he's likable, but not likable, like he's like somebody you don't like, but can't hate. I don't know. But I also found, what's that?
No, that's good. I think that is the complexity of a character, that it's someone that you might not like, but you can't really hate either, because it's almost like
Yeah.
this is a product of his time. Like he's
Yeah.
existing in a space that is so foreign, but yet he seems right for it. If that
Yeah.
makes sense.
So
Yeah.
an example of that, as you guys were talking about it, is how, if you notice throughout the book, like there's a lot of these like violent encounters. So even when he rolls up into this bar where he's finally found this person that he's been looking for, in the bar, like he almost immediately gets into a bar fight, with these other bar people there, and like it's a pattern throughout the book. He'll get into a violent fight, fisticuffs, whatever, gun shooting, whatever, with other people, but then like immediately afterwards, they're like getting along. Like, oh yeah, I understand, or like they like have an amicable relationship right after they've beat the crap out of each other, and so. I thought it was so perplexing that like they have this violent interaction and then they're like, hey, sorry about that. Let me get you a bandage and send you to the hospital because I shot you in the foot. Like it's just like,
Right.
and it was a pattern.
Yeah.
It happens like throughout the book. So
Yeah. Like the guys who beat him up and put him in the bathtub, they were very kind about it. It was he called it a professional beating. So nothing was broken, but they wrapped him in tape, stuck a sock in his mouth, and said, "Sorry, nothing personal."
But it was a clean sock. That was their courtesy. It was a clean sock.
Yes, a clean sock. But it's that kind of thing where this is incredible. But I think he's also in the book, and I don't want to give too much away. I think, and Laura, you mentioned this in a post on our Facebook page, that it's almost like it's meta in a way when he talks about art and writing, that in some ways he's kind of talking about himself as being kind of like this hack writer. And so I think it's on it's sort of close to the middle of the book, maybe about page 89.
89. Yep, page 89.
Yep.
Does someone want to read that part?
I have it open. This is where he says, and so he's talking about Traherne is a writer, right? So he's saying about Traherne's writing. All 3 novels were bestsellers, all made into successful movies, and perhaps because of his reputation as a poet, well reviewed. But as far as I could tell, the books were fair hack work, cluttered with literary allusions and symbols. And I laughed out loud, literally, when I read that. Fancy dreck, one unimpressed reviewer called them. The male characters, even the villains and cowards, cling to a macho code so blatant that even an illiterate punk in an East LA Pachuco gang could understand it immediately. The female characters serve as stage props, scenery, and victims. And the stories were always incredible. And Kofi, you just used that word, incredible, right? Yeah.
That's exactly.
And it's all true about this novel.
Exactly the novel. He summed up the entire novel. And if you want to read it, that's it. That's what you're reading.
Folks, that is the summary of this novel, basically.
And then, can I tell you, on page 213 later, Traherne says the same thing about his own work, and it's actually in quotation marks. Like he's saying it. He says, I can't stop, so I'm going to give in to listen. I know what sort of sentimental nonsense my poetry is, and I know what sort of macho dreck my fiction is. I'm as phony as my goddamn crazy mother, and so on. So I love that, like, sort of circles back later, and Traherne says it about his own writing.
Yeah, and it does feel like I can imagine coming out of that Iowa workshop. You're not Raymond Carver. You're coming out, and you're a crime fighter. You're a crime fiction writer. Which, the Iowa writing workshop, that's not what they're known of producing, that they're known to produce people like, Flannery O'Connor. And I mentioned
Flannery O'Connor, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so this is just, it is hackery, but it's also fun. um, you get the sense that if C.W. Shagru was trying to find you, he would give an honest attempt. And that's pretty much what you want if you're hiring somebody to find your lost loved ones. You want them to give it an honest attempt. But he's going to drink a whole lot and get into a whole lot of fisticuffs and so forth.
Yes.
In terms of tone, how did you ladies think of the tone of it? Because it seemed one way, but it kind of got a little light. Well, maybe lighthearted isn't the right word, but the tone doesn't actually stay the same in each chapter. Sometimes it seems to be a little more light and reflective in some ways. Or did you think of it that way, or not at all? Or are you too caught up in that?
I actually, now that I didn't think about it when I was reading it, but now that you mention it, I do feel like there were these moments where things seemed just so hilarious because how crazy these characters were and behaving. And then it would kind of go into these really serious moments, or, like pages where it's much more serious and there's a lot of commentary about, what's happened to some of these characters. And even I think the characters' own tone, because I guess like people, their moods change, right? So one moment they can be serious, and another moment they can be, silly, or just in a different emotional state, I guess. So there was a lot of, it was like kind of an emotional roller coaster of each of the characters. How sometimes they're so drunk, right, that they're not in their right mind, and then another moment they're completely sober, and the tone is sober in at the same time. So yeah, I could see that. I think I understand what you mean by that, the tone change.
Yeah, I think
For
the
me,
thing that helped me. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Sylvia.
The lag on our new platform. For me, the tone for me changed whenever he was interacting with like people, and I actually came to enjoy those scenes the most because they were predictable and unpredictable at the same time. So one thing about Marlowe, who is Raymond Chandler's PI, and Shagru that I have always appreciated is the way that they read people.
Right.
So yeah, so like with Shagru, his instinct or automatic inclination when he meets someone to question them for the first time is automatically that they're lying to him, and that they have something else like going on underneath what they're saying. And he's really good at picking that up because he's a detective, he's a PI. And a really great example of that is when he meets Betty Sue, who's a missing person he's looking for. Betty Sue's boyfriend, who's the last person who saw her alive, or who saw her before she went missing, like 10 years prior. And, he's kind of giving Shagru this sort of sob story about how he has never stopped looking for her. She was his first love, and he's always sort of been obsessed about it. And how he would even go to the morgue every time a Jane Doe was found just to see if it was her, to check. And that's kind of like the level of like obsession he had with this case, and to kind of find her, and that's how much he cared for her. And then Shagru kind of like, he gets into like this verbal psychological fight with him, and then at the end he basically calls him out, and he says that he could see her boyfriend at the morgue doing this check every time, and he says, but I saw your face all scrunched up in disappointment every time you didn't find her under that rubber sheet. I know you're a nice person and all that, and you didn't mean to feel that way, but you did. And if I find her, you'll never hear about it from me. And I thought it was like, I was like, oh my gosh, like the way he reads people is so like spot on from what they say and what they don't say. And to me, that was like the most exciting part of it. But that to me is what also fluctuates the tone, because the way he reads men and the way he reads women are very different too. And yeah, but anyways.
Mhm.
Yeah, that I agree with that. He does read people very differently, but he's almost always very suspicious. Um,
Mhm.
Even when he meets Selma Hines, he he is initially trying not to be suspicious, but he still checks the death date. He still checks for the death certificates. He still ends up, you know, questioning not just her but also Catherine. And there's always this idea of, and I guess the question I kept having, what is the last good kiss? Is it the thing? Is it the
Oh.
pursuit of the people? Is it the sort of, this is his purpose to seek people out and find them, even though he seems reluctant to do it? But there's something about that thrill, that's something about that profession. And I wonder, is that the last good kiss, or is it Trey Hearns pining away over the widow, or is it um, what we make out of life and art? What is that last good kiss? And so I've never quite got that far to see. I mean,
Well,
got that. What was it for these
I was
characters?
a
That is.
little bit more literal, and I was actually looking for a kiss. Like, who's this kiss gonna be with, and which character is it gonna be? Is it Melinda? Is it Betty Sue? Is it Catherine? Um, um, but yeah, I the title did intrigue me mainly because I it kept me wondering the whole time, right? And then eventually I couldn't figure it out, but it did sort of like it was kind of a thread throughout, like what is this going to mean, the last kiss,
Mhm.
what is that going to be a reference to? But like you, I didn't come to a conclusion about what that is, but it's a good question. Yeah.
And maybe there is no conclusion. Maybe that we're all looking for the last good kiss, and maybe that's just it. It's the
Or that we've
pursuit,
already
and that's
had
how.
it and we don't realize.
Yeah, like we had
So,
it, and we got to go back and try to get it again.
but see, I don't know, because like the Hugo poem from Where It Comes is sort of like, so, and this is kind of how I felt like Crumley deals with time in the book too. So like he starts off with that famous opening line that by the time I caught up with Traherne, he was getting drunk with a bulldog in a bar or something like that. And then he shifts back before that to show you how he got to that point. And then he brings you back to
Mhm.
that bar, and then for
Mm-hmm.
Shagru, maybe as a reader myself, like I kept thinking we were looking at him broke down, but also like right at that cusp before he's totally like jaded. And the actions that he does, like the fact that he doesn't want to be suspicious of people, but he is, and almost every time he chooses to double check or to be suspicious of someone who seems like a good person, he's almost always right about having been suspicious of that person. And I really feel like there's a moment where he seems like a good guy deep down, but there's a moment where he tips over into complete cynicism and like jadedness, and I think it's sort of at the end where you realize, things would have worked fine, but they don't. And it sort of kind of shuts that light out forever. But at the same time, I also think, like, I think Traherne talks about too on like a writing level. What if this is the last good thing I ever wrote? What if this is the
Mm.
last good
Right.
thing I ever write? And I think a lot of writers struggle with that too. I'm sure Crumley did, but the poet Louise Glick used to say, like, she feared the empty page because, like, every time she wrote something down, what if that's the last poem I ever wrote? Like, what if it doesn't
Mm.
come again or something? Everything I write, I hate, that kind of a thing. So I don't know. I was kind of reading it with those lens too, but you're right. Like, there's no real conclusive,
Yeah.
definite answer.
Yeah.
I think we might be out of time now.
Yes.
So I want to say thank you, Kofi, for introducing us to, at least me, to this book. I had no idea about about this writer. But it also made me kind of think about other detective novels that I have been reading, and I realized that, but most of what I have read are women characters. So for example, I was reading Steph Cha's like a trilogy of detective novels. After we read Your House Will Pay, I got into that series. And it's just an interesting thing to be able to appreciate a thing for what it is and not necessarily only in comparison to other things. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
And to
Yeah.
appreciate what it's trying to do to be its own thing. So even though it's not my cup of tea, I was really intrigued through the read, and I might give Raymond Chandler a try. So thank you for that introduction. So our listeners, I hope you all are having a fun summer reading experience, and we'd love to hear what you're reading on if you share with us on Facebook. Look us up, Bookish, and our episode will air on Podbean, but also on YouTube. And again, please visit us on Facebook and leave us comments about our episodes and just share about your reading news. And maybe in the fall when we'll do like a, I don't know, report back of what we read over the summer together. So, and you can look us up on Dragon Digital Howard Community College too. Thank you, everybody. Enjoy the rest
Bye,
of your
Thank you.
summer.
everyone.